Hi, this is Heather Box, the co-founder and CEO of the Million Person Project. And the Million Person Project is a global project about love, storytelling, and connecting change makers. And I am so excited to be here today with the one and only Bill McKibben, who is one of the co-founders of 350.org and an amazing leader in his own right. So welcome, Bill.
Good to be with you, friend.
So why don't you just tell our viewers a little bit about 350, just so that they know what it is that you are up to in the world?
Sure. 350.org's getting close to a decade old now. It was the first, and I think really remains the only, global grassroots climate change campaign. And we started it on a very modest way in 2008 with myself and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College in Vermont. And our thinking was that there probably were lots of people who wanted to go to work on climate change around the world. And the trick would be figuring out how to connect them up. And it turned out we were right. There were lots of people. Within a year or so, we'd staged what CNN called the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history, 5,200 simultaneous demonstrations in 181 countries.
Wow.
We've gone on to hold about 20,000 rallies and protests in every country but North Korea. And moving kind of from education to confrontation, we've helped lead the fight over the Keystone Pipeline, organizing the largest civil disobedience action about anything in this country in 30 years, and now this very large campaign for the divestment of fossil fuel stock, which now has engaged portfolios with the worth of about $4 trillion in getting out of the coal or oil or gas business.
Wow. I have been part of the 350.org network for years. I've worked there, I've partnered, yeah. And Julia and I have had the extreme honor of going to places all around the world: Fiji, Uganda, Vietnam, Brazil, Tonga, Kiribati, and getting to work with a lot of the 350.org climate organizers to support them in telling their personal story. And it has been so inspiring. And there's so many questions that I have for you about your story. And when you started this campaign, what was your story, and how has this whole campaign evolved your story?
I wrote the first book on climate change way back in 1989, so before you were born, you know. And at the time I thought I was a writer, a journalist. That was my entire role in the world. And I think in a rational world, that would be the case. That's what I'm best at. And I assumed that if I and others wrote books, articles, presented the evidence, that political systems would begin to change to reflect the fact that we were dealing with the most serious challenge humans have yet faced. But when that change didn't come, it began finally to dawn on me that we weren't engaged in an argument, we were engaged in a fight. And that the fight wasn't about data and reason. We'd won that argument long ago. The fight, as fights usually are, was about money and power. And furthermore, that the other side had all the money and power. The fossil fuel industry is the richest industry on earth. And with that comes a great deal of unearned political power. So our job, it seemed to me, was to figure out how to build a different kind of currency, how to bank a different kind of capital. And that was going to be the currency of movements: passion, spirit, creativity, sometimes the willingness to spend one's body and go to jail. And so that's what we set out to do with 350. So for me, it's been the transition from just a writer to a writer and organizer as well.
Why did you believe in the first place that you could make a change?
Well, I didn't know if I believed that we could. I believed we had to try, because the stakes were so high. But my sense was that there were a lot of people who were very worried about climate change. And the thing that was holding them back from acting was the sense that they were too small to make any difference, which is actually a correct intuition. each of us as individuals is pretty much useless in the face of climate change. Yes, one should change one's light bulbs. I mean, my house is covered with solar panels. You know, I drove the first electric car in Vermont, but I don't try to fool myself that that's actually making much difference. This is a structural and systemic problem, and hence it can only be dealt with politically. And as individuals, we're impotent to do anything about that. It's when we come together that we have some power. And so I thought that the first goal was probably to convince people that there were enough other people who cared that there might be some outside shot at making something happen. That's why we did that first day of action in such a vast geographic scale. We knew we couldn't get 500,000 people yet into New York City to march. Now we can, but in those days we couldn't. So we figured it'd be better to do thousands of small gatherings all over the world and use that spread to make people feel part of something big. And that kind of worked, and we built from there.
Yeah, and you have had a chance to like circle the globe meeting a lot of these people. Is there one or two stories that is like forever on your heart, like that has really moved you and inspired you to be? Is there one that sticks out to you?
Oh, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories all over the world. But the stories that, you know, make me happiest are the stories about great activism and people discovering their power to act. I love the way that the Pacific climate warriors, you know, rallied to build their canoes on half a dozen islands and take them to Australia and use them to blockade the biggest coal port in the world, the site of those traditional canoes, keeping some of the biggest ships in the world in the harbor, spoke volumes to me. I think that in general, the kind of leadership of indigenous people all over the world, from the Pacific Islands to the tar sands of Alberta, is been a magnificent inspiration. And I've been very, very impressed to watch the ability of people of all kinds to work together. It's been indigenous groups and frontline communities in the lead, but then all the people that, you know, we used to wonder about it, the big green environmental groups and stuff, turned out to be completely willing to engage and fight and do a terrific job. That was one of the great lessons of the Keystone Battle, was this big, beautiful coalition that got built. So there are lots of things about it that please me greatly.
What is it like to partner with people and work every day with people like 20, 25 years younger than you?
Well, I think it's good because they tend to work hard. I always caution them not to think of themselves particularly as young people. One of the things I hate is when you go to these big UN climate conferences or something, and there's always like Youth Day, and some, you know, young people go and present their manifesto and get to make a little speech, and everyone pats them politely on the head and applauds and sends them away. And then they get back down to real work. To me, young people are just people. And it's probably best to think of oneself less as a young person and more as a citizen, especially because, you know, across most of the world, in the developing world, young people's mostly what there are, you know. That's what the world's composed of.
Yeah, and so one thing that I have noticed about you is that you are committed to the movement, and you will step up when it's appropriate for you to step up and you feel like that's the best thing for the movement, but that you're sort of in a constant effort to try to step back and to let the movement. And so there are so many people here that are watching this video that negotiate with that. Like, if I tell my story, am I the front of the movement? How do I balance making space for other people? So what is your angle on that?
My thinking is just that this is, I mean, you know, we don't have a great leader in the climate movement. There's no Dr. King, you know. If there was, maybe we'd have a different strategy. But it seems to me by a very good thing that in the absence of that, what we have is essentially a kind of leaderless movement. More, the image that comes to mind for me is a kind of resistance, like the French resistance during the war, um, but all over the world. Sprawling, local, able to confront the fossil fuel industry at every turn, which is good because this industry itself is sprawling and everywhere and needs to have people in its face at every frack well, every new coal mine, every railroad crossing, every new proposed coal port, on and on and on. But at the same time, because we're networked reasonably well together, we're able to come together as a movement when there are big occasions that demand it, when there are kind of big set piece battles like Keystone. And so I think that, that it's good that we're essentially leaderless, but it's also good that we have, what you might call kind of elders who have been around a while and have seen some of the things that work. So there's plenty of people that I look to, and Clayton Thomas Muller, or Jane Klebb, or Karedi Tumialu, or Aaron Packard, or Gus Speth, or a very long list, Mike Brune, and Rebecca Solnit, and Terry Tempest Williams, and the list goes on all over the world. These are just the kind of people, Bill Erasmus, Reuben George, who just all seem, hundreds who are able to bring different things to bear here. And I like that kind of rich ecosystem.
As a young person, when you were a young person, who was one of your greatest teachers or inspirations, and why?
Well, I mean, as someone who looks at the broad scope of history sometimes and teaches and writes a little bit about it, I mean, the 20th century had great landmark figures who developed this new technology of nonviolent resistance, and they were the most important people of the 20th century. Gandhi, Dr. King, Mandela, and so to me, those are figures that one looks to all the time. Fannie Lou Hamer, just powerful examples of new ways to do things. And I think we're only now kind of beginning to understand or even grapple with all the possibilities. We have a great sense of how military power works. We all have, there's West Point, and there's something like West Point in every country in the world, where we have lots of people sit around studying how to fight wars all the time. But we haven't applied the same rigor to figuring out how to make change peacefully. But we're getting there, and it's fun to watch.
Mm. And when you think about those people, those people that have inspired you, what is it about them?
Well, they had, in particular, figures like Gandhi or King had tremendous reservoirs of faith on which to draw, and that enabled them to connect easily with all the people around them. The ability to connect with most people strikes me as prerequisite for good organizing. And somehow they had it. I don't know whether that's charisma or whatever it is, but I think it has a lot to do with being able to get results, to understand how to be effective. So they're all remarkable examples.
And what is it for you? What is it that you do or have in your life that continues to keep your faith and your ability to go out and connect?
Well, I'm just always moved by the vast swath of people now taking up this fight. So because we've done these 20,000 demonstrations around the world, we have 20 or 30,000 or probably 60 or 80,000 photographs in the Flickr file from all over the world. And if I get to feeling hopeless, I go look at them, a few of them, because they're a good reminder that if people all over the world in much tougher circumstances than I'm in, and in places that did nothing to cause this problem, if they're willing to keep working, keep fighting, whatever, then so surely can we.
Hmm. Do you remember that photo from, I think it was from 10-10-10, of the man in Mongolia on a horse with the 350 banner?
Yes.
That's the one for me. Like,
Yeah.
when that photo came through, I was like, this is a global movement. Like,
Yep.
we're all bringing our own culture, our own attitude, our own family into
One of
this.
the first pictures that came through in that first big day of action we did in 2009 came from Bangladesh, and it was three older women holding water jugs, and one said 3, 5, and 0 on the jugs. And I'd spent a fair amount of time in Bangladesh, gotten dengue there in their first big outbreak of that climate spread disease. And it's one of the countries I love most in the world. And so it moved me very much to see pictures coming in from there. Moves me very much to see today, 7 years later, thousands of people on marching today across Bangladesh to protest plans for a new coal plant in the Sundarbans. So stuff like that all over our planet. It does feel, it feels as if the planet is running a fever, and it feels as if the antibodies are kicking in, the antibodies being us, the kind of immune system of the earth. Now, that doesn't mean we got going in time. I'm not sure. I mean, sometimes fevers kill people, and the science around climate change is pretty dark, but at least there's a fight underway. People are now engaged, and that's satisfying.
For me, when I was in the Pacific, one of the things that was almost hard for me to compute was the centuries and connection to the land, like not to the land, like to the plot of land that the family has been on. And I was so thankful for Fenton and for Tawani and Coretti for staying with me through understanding that, and all of my naive questions to understand really what that connection to the earth means, and how the interconnectedness between their family and the earth. And
right. And how insanely unfair it is that cultures that have been in place for 5,000 years won't last out the century unless we're able to make huge change fast.
Yeah.
Your friends in Fiji just saw the highest wind speeds ever registered in the Southern Hemisphere. There's still tens of thousands of people homeless in Fiji. The water is rising, you know. That's why the fight's so urgent.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And Julian loves you. And one of the things that he loves about you, in addition to all of your amazing, activism and the way that you inspire us, is the music, your love for music. And so I'd love to hear about what you're listening to lately. What's been on the playlist?
Well, I've been listening to all kinds of things, but when I get I've been a little somber lately because the science has been so bad. And so to bring myself back up, I go back to America's great music, the soul and jazz of the late 60s and into the 70s. So I was listening last night full blast to the Nina Simone version of Ooh, Child.
Oh, nice.
And if that doesn't do it for you, nothing will. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Bill. It was an honor to get to interview you today. And
as always, Heather, it's really fun to see you.
Yeah.
And thank you for all your work, so much of it for so long.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you for yours.
Take care, sister.
Okay, bye.